When Maya Rodriguez received a call in the middle of the night offering $2,000 for a single massage session, she knew something was wrong. But with her daughter's medical bills piling up and desperation knocking at the door, she couldn't say no. What she didn't expect was that the mysterious client would pay far more than promised. $1 million for a night that would change both their lives forever. Alexander Blackstone, the feared business tycoon, had built an empire on the ashes of his own humanity, becoming a relentless machine of success and achievement. But when the gentle hands of a humble massage therapist touched not only his tense muscles but also the deep wounds of his soul, something extraordinary happened. For decades, no one had managed to break through the emotional armor he built to survive. Until that night, could the tears of a powerful man be the price of redemption?
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The alarm hadn't gone off yet when the phone started buzzing on the nightstand, making a sharp noise against the worn wood. Maya Rodriguez opened her eyes slowly, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion that never seemed to fully leave her. The room was plunged in the early morning darkness of Chicago, with only the dim light from a street lamp filtering through the cheap curtains she'd bought on clearance at Walmart. 3:42 a.m. The phone screen blinked insistently, and Maya felt that tightness in her chest that always came with calls at this hour. Emma. Her daughter was always the first thing on her mind. Hello. Her voice came out hoarse, still heavy with sleep. Maya Rodriguez? The voice on the other end was male, formal, with an accent she couldn't place. Sorry to bother you so early. I'm Marcus, an executive assistant. I have a proposal you might be interested in. Maya sat up in bed, her bare feet touching the cold carpet. The wood floor creaked slightly, another item on the endless list of things that needed fixing in the apartment. How did you get my number? She asked, suspicion sharpening her senses. 2 years of living alone with Emma had taught her to be cautious. Your name was recommended by Serenity Spa. I need a massage therapist for a house call. Today. It's urgent, and I can pay $2,000. The number echoed in the silence of the room like distant thunder. $2,000. Maya swallowed hard, suddenly feeling a dry mouth. It was more than she made in a whole month at the spa. 2,000, she repeated, almost whispering so as not to wake Emma in the next room. The client is very demanding and values discretion above all. The session would be right now in the Lincoln Park area. I can send a car to pick you up. Maya looked around the modest room. The pile of bills on the dresser seemed to silently scream at her. An electricity bill with a second notice, a credit card statement she barely managed to pay the minimum on, and most of all, Emma's medical bills mounting since the specialist visit last month. The suspicion that her daughter might have inherited the same heart condition as her father kept Maya awake most nights. Is it a regular massage session? She asked, hating the hesitation in her own voice. Completely professional, Miss Rodriguez. Therapeutic massage for someone with severe muscle tension. The client does not accept service in traditional spas due to their need for privacy. Through the window, Maya could see the first lights turning on in neighboring buildings. Chicago was starting to wake up, and outside, millions of people would begin another day fighting to survive. She was no different from any of them. My daughter, she started to say. The car can wait as long as you need to get ready. This is a unique opportunity, Miss Rodriguez. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. $2,000. It would be enough to pay off Emma's medical bills and still have some left for other expenses. Maybe she could even buy the new sneakers Emma needed for gym. Her current ones were so worn out Emma had started walking differently to hide the holes in the soles. All right, she said finally, the word coming out like a sigh. I accept. Excellent. The address is 1247 North Lake Shore Drive. The driver will be there in 40 minutes. Please bring all your professional equipment. The call ended, leaving Maya alone again with the silence of the early morning. She sat on the bed for a few seconds, processing everything that had just happened. $2,000 for a single session. It was too surreal to be real, but at the same time too desperate to refuse. She got up quietly, her feet already knowing every creaky floorboard on the way to the bathroom. The cold shower fully woke her up, and while dressing, a discreet pair of black pants, a white professional blouse, hair tied in a simple bun, her mind raced at full speed. Lincoln Park, the priciest area of Chicago, where apartments cost more than she would make in 10 years. Who was this mysterious client paying small fortunes for a house massage? Maya carefully opened Emma's bedroom door. Her daughter was sleeping deeply, her face relaxed in the peace of adolescence. At 17, Emma had inherited her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. She was a good girl, studious, who never complained about hand-me-down clothes or simple meals. But Maya knew that behind that early maturity was a young woman who deserved far more than life had given them. "I'm going to work, sweetie," she murmured softly, adjusting the blanket over her daughter's shoulders. "I'll be back before you wake up." Emma mumbled something inaudible in response, turning to the other side without waking. In the tiny kitchen, Maya prepared her professional kit. Essential oils, lavender, eucalyptus, peppermint, clean, soft towels, her best cotton sheets, relaxing music on her portable player. Each item had been carefully chosen over the years, an investment in the career she'd built bit by bit after David died. The accident was still an open wound in her memory. A rainy morning, David leaving early for his construction job, a drunk driver running a red light. In seconds, their whole life together crumbled like sand through fingers. Maya shook her head, pushing the painful memories away. This was not the time to look back. Emma needed a strong mother, focused on the future, not someone lost in the past. Outside, the sound of a quiet engine caught her attention. Through the window, she saw a black sedan stopped in front of the building, elegant and discreet like the rest of this mysterious situation. The driver, a middle-aged man in a dark suit, gave her a brief nod. Maya took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nerves and determination settle in her chest. She grabbed her kit with one hand, her purse with the other, and gave one last look at the humble but clean apartment that had been her refuge for the past 2 years. The building stairs creaked familiarly under her feet as she went down. Outside, the cold Chicago dawn air hit her with a gust that made her eyes water slightly. The driver opened the car's back door without a word, just a polite nod. As the sedan slid through the still, empty city streets, Maya watched the scenery gradually change. The modest buildings in her neighborhood gave way to ever more elegant constructions, the streets growing wider and better lit. Soon, they would be in the area where the wealthy lived their lives behind high walls and sophisticated security systems. $2,000 echoed in her mind like a mantra. Enough to buy a little more time, a little more hope. Enough to ensure Emma got the medical appointments she needed and maybe, just maybe, a slightly brighter future. The car turned left onto Lakeshore Drive, and Maya felt her heart race. Whatever awaited her in that elegant house among Chicago's rich and powerful, she was ready. Had to be. The sedan slipped through the wrought iron gates like a ghost in the night, and Maya felt her stomach tighten as she took in the vastness of the estate stretching out before her. The Lake Forest mansion stood like a fortress of stone and glass, its dark windows reflecting the subtle lights of the meticulously maintained garden. It was the kind of place she'd only seen in movies, where ordinary people like her showed up just to clean or serve. The driver stopped in front of a side entrance, discreet yet elegant, and Maya stepped out, feeling the weight of each footfall on the perfectly laid gravel. The cool, early morning air carried the scent of expensive plants and gardening products she didn't even know existed. "Miss Rodriguez?" A male voice, different from the one on the phone, echoed from the silently opened door. A man in his 40s, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Maya's rent for several months, approached with measured steps. "I'm James, Mr. Blackstone's personal assistant. Please, follow me." Maya adjusted the briefcase strap on her shoulder and followed James down a hallway that looked like it belonged in a home design magazine. The walls were paneled in polished dark wood, decorated with paintings Maya guessed were originals, not the cheap reproductions she knew. Every step echoed softly on the marble floor, a sound that gave her footsteps an importance she didn't feel she deserved. "Mr. Blackstone has some particular preferences," James murmured as they walked, his voice low but clear. He prefers minimal verbal interaction. It's a matter of efficiency. Maya nodded, although the choice of words struck her as odd. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, adorned with art pieces that probably cost more than everything she owned. The chill in the air wasn't just from the air conditioning. It was as if the very walls resisted human warmth. "Here," James said, stopping in front of two oak double doors. "The library." The doors opened, revealing a space that took Maya's breath away. Shelves rose to the high ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes that looked never to have been touched. An unlit fireplace dominated one wall, and through the enormous windows, Lake Michigan stretched to the horizon, its dark waters reflecting the moon like a shattered mirror. And then she saw him. Alexander Blackstone stood by the window, an imposing silhouette against the glass. Tall, about 6'2", with broad shoulders filling the dark silk robe he wore. Silver-gray hair, perfectly styled even at this hour, framed a face that could have been carved from marble. When he turned to face her, Maya felt a chill run down her spine. His eyes, God, those eyes, ice blue, devoid of any warmth or curiosity. They looked through her as if she were just another object in the room, useful but completely disposable. There was no hostility in them, which somehow made it even more disturbing. Just absolute indifference that made Maya feel as if she were dissolving under that gaze. Alexander didn't say a word of greeting. No smile, no nod, no gesture that could be interpreted as basic courtesy. He simply raised an arm and pointed to a discreet door in the corner of the library. "1 hour," he said, his deep voice seeming to come from somewhere deep in his chest.
"No unnecessary conversation."
Each word was spoken with surgical precision, as if he'd measured the exact minimum amount of communication required. It wasn't rudeness, it was worse. It was like he had reduced human interaction to its most functional expression, stripping it of any trace of humanity. Maya swallowed hard, feeling the bitter taste of saliva in her throat. "Yes, sir," she managed to murmur, her voice sounding strangely fragile in the vast library space. James led her to the adjoining room, which turned out to be set up specifically for the occasion. It was smaller than the library but still bigger than Maya's living room. A professional massage table had been provided of higher quality than the ones she used at the spa, and white, soft towels were folded and warmed in a small heater in the corner. "Everything you need is available," James said, his voice keeping that professional but not impersonal tone his employer demanded. "There is water, ambient music, and temperature control. Mr. Blackstone prefers a warm environment for sessions." When James left, quietly closing the door behind him, Maya was alone with the weight of the encounter. Her hands trembled slightly as she unpacked her equipment, and she had to take several deep breaths to regain her professional composure. $2,000. She repeated to herself. Think of Emma. Think of the medical bills. She began preparing the room as she always did, but there was something different this time. It wasn't just the excessive luxury of the place or the client's strange behavior. It was the feeling that she had entered a world where the usual rules didn't apply, where coldness was cultivated as a virtue, and humanity was seen as a weakness. Maya adjusted the room's temperature, tested the firmness of the table, arranged her oils in order of preference. She put on soft music Chopin, something she hoped would fit the sophisticated setting, and dimmed the lighting to create a relaxing atmosphere. But no matter how much she tried to create a welcoming space, the chill of the place resisted her efforts. It was like trying to warm an iceberg with a candle. When she finished the preparations, Maya took one last look around the room. Everything was perfect, professional, exactly as it should be. Her hands had stopped shaking, and she could feel the professional mask settling over her face. That calm, competent expression she had cultivated over years of working with all kinds of clients. She returned to the library, where Alexander Blackstone was still standing in the same spot by the window, as if he hadn't moved a single inch while she was gone. Moonlight highlighted the hard lines of his profile, and Maya realized he was younger than he had first seemed. In his 50s, maybe, but carrying a weariness that seemed far older than his face. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Everything is ready. If you would take a seat on the table, we can begin." He turned slowly, those blue, empty eyes fixing on her once more. For a moment, Just a fraction of a second. Maya thought she saw something pass through that icy expression. Curiosity. Appraisal? But it was so quick she couldn't be sure. Alexander gave a single nod, an almost imperceptible movement of his head, and walked toward the adjoining room. His steps were silent on the thick carpet, and Maya followed him, feeling like she was about to enter unknown territory. What she didn't know was that on the other side of that door awaited much more than a simple massage session. It awaited the meeting of two wounded souls, each carrying their own invisible scars, about to discover that sometimes you have to touch the deepest wounds to begin to heal them. The soft light in the room cast gentle shadows over Maya's olive skin as she waited for Alexander to settle onto the massage table. He moved with almost military precision, each movement calculated and controlled, as if even the simple act of lying down required strategic planning. When he finally positioned himself face down on the table, Maya could see the tension radiating from every line of his body. The muscles in his shoulders were contracted like cords about to snap, and his spine felt like an iron bar beneath his pale skin. It was as if he were preparing for battle, not a moment of relaxation. "I'll start with lavender oil," Maya said softly, warming the oil between her palms. "If the scent bothers you, I can switch." Alexander didn't reply, but Maya noticed a slight stiffening in his shoulders when she mentioned the possibility of changing it. It was as if even the suggestion that his preferences mattered was unfamiliar to him. Maya placed her hands gently on his shoulders, immediately sensing resistance. It was like trying to massage marble. There was life there, blood flowing, human warmth, but it was all locked beneath layers of tension that seemed years in the making. She began with soft movements, simply letting her hands get used to the temperature and texture of his skin. Alexander kept his breathing controlled and methodical, as if counting every inhale and exhale mentally. It was the kind of control Maya had only seen once before, in a war veteran client struggling with nightmares. As she worked, small details caught her attention. The skin on his back wasn't uniform. There were pale, nearly invisible lines crossing in irregular patterns. Old scars, faded by time but still visible to trained eyes. Maya touched them with extra care, instinctively aware that each mark told a story she wasn't entitled to know. "I'm going to increase the pressure a little now," she murmured, her hands moving along the tense muscles in his neck. "Let me know if it gets uncomfortable." That's when something made Maya pause for a fraction of a second. Alexander flinched, not from pain, but as if caught off guard by something completely unexpected. The tremor was subtle, traveling through his muscles like a wave, and Maya felt his breath hitch briefly before returning to its steady rhythm. She continued working, her hands finding points of extreme tension between his shoulder blades. Every time she touched certain spots, Alexander reacted the same way. An instant stiffening, as if bracing for injury, followed by that involuntary tremor when he realized the touch was gentle. It was heartbreaking, Maya realized. This man, apparently powerful, surrounded by luxury and absolute control, had developed defensive reflexes so deep that even therapeutic touch made him prepare for pain. Maya adjusted her technique, using even softer movements, almost as if she were working with someone recovering from physical trauma. Her hands danced over his skin with the delicacy of someone caring for something very fragile and precious. "Is this pressure okay?" she asked quietly, her hands pausing over a particularly tight knot between his neck and shoulder. Silence stretched for several seconds. Maya could feel Alexander processing the question, as if her words were written in a foreign language. "No one's asked that in a long time," he finally muttered, his voice muffled against the table's towel. There was something in the way he said it. Not self-pity or drama, just a simple acknowledgement of a fact he seemed to be realizing at that moment. Something tightened in Maya's chest. How many years had it been since someone cared about this man's comfort? How many decades of touch that was only functional, transactional, without any genuine concern for his well-being? "Well, I always ask," she said softly, continuing with gentle circular motions. "Everyone's different. What works for one person can be terrible for another." She sensed more than saw Alexander absorbing this. It was as if a completely new idea was forming in his mind, the notion that his individual needs might matter to someone, even if it was just a hired massage therapist. Maya kept working, her hands finding and releasing years of built-up tension. She worked with the patience of someone who understood true healing couldn't be rushed. It was like uncovering a precious archaeological artifact. Each movement had to be deliberate, careful, respectful. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, she felt a change beginning beneath her hands. Alexander's breathing, once so rigidly controlled, started finding a more natural rhythm. The muscles that had been contracted like armor began to give way slightly, allowing her hands to work more deeply. "That's good," Maya whispered, more to herself than to him, as she felt a particularly stubborn knot finally start to loosen. "You can let your muscles relax. I'm not going to hurt you." The words came naturally, part of the professional script she used with all her clients. But the moment she spoke them, Maya realized there was something different about how they sounded in this room, to this man. They weren't just technical instructions. They were almost like a promise. Alexander didn't respond with words, but Maya felt his reaction in his body. It was subtle, just a slightly deeper sigh, a barely perceptible relaxation in his shoulders, but it was enough for her to know he had heard and, more importantly, believed her. She continued working in silence, letting her hands speak the universal language of human care. It wasn't just about massage technique. It was about touching another human being with the intention to heal, to soothe, to offer the basic kindness everyone deserves but not everyone receives. As the minutes passed, Maya realized she was witnessing something rare and precious. This man, this walking fortress of control and isolation, was starting to lower his defenses, one microscopic layer at a time. It was like watching ice begin to melt on the first warm day of spring. She didn't fully understand what was happening, nor the magnitude of what her gentle hands were unraveling. She didn't know that every respectful touch was breaking down decades of conditioning, that every question about his comfort was cracking walls Alexander had built brick by brick to survive in a world that had taught him vulnerability was always punished. All Maya knew was that beneath her hands was a human being who had forgotten how to accept care, and something deep in her soul, the same strength that made her such a protective mother to Emma, was awakening to respond to that silent need. When she felt Alexander finally, truly relax for the first time since she'd started, Maya closed her eyes for a moment, instinctively acknowledging that something important had changed in that quiet room. She couldn't know that on the table beneath her hands, Alexander Blackstone was experiencing something he hadn't felt in over 30 years. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was worthy of gentleness. Maya's hands kept working meticulously, and as Alexander's muscles began to give in, something unexpected happened. The absolute silence he had imposed started to crack, like ice breaking under the weight of its own tension. "Your technique is different," he said suddenly, his voice still muffled against the towel but carrying a genuine curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Where did you learn it?" Maya maintained the rhythm of her hands, working on a particularly tense spot between his shoulder blades. "Massage therapy school in Evanston," she replied simply. "But mostly I learned through practice. Every person teaches you something new about how the body holds stress." She felt Alexander process that information, and there was a long pause before he spoke again. "Stress," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "That's an interesting way to put it. Most professionals who've been here before only talked about tight muscles, technique, pressure. Never about what causes the tension." Maya kept working, her hands finding and undoing knots that seemed years in the making. "Well, the body doesn't lie," she said softly. "It holds everything the mind tries to forget. Sometimes we treat the symptoms, but the cause stays there, creating new points of tension." She felt a tremor run through his body, not from cold or discomfort, but something deeper, like her words had touched something he'd buried long ago. "I haven't slept in 3 weeks," Alexander said abruptly, the words rushing out as if escaping from somewhere he'd kept locked up. "Maybe 4. I lost count." Maya paused for a moment, her hands resting gently on his shoulders. It was the first genuinely personal thing he'd shared, and she could feel the weight of vulnerability in his simple admission. "Stress can cause severe insomnia," she said, going back to work with even softer movements. "When the mind can't turn off, neither can the body." "Medicine," he murmured. "I take meds to sleep, for pain, for everything, but they stop working after a while." And when they do, it's not real sleep. It's just absence. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. The way he described it, absence instead of rest, was heartbreaking. It was like he'd gotten used to existing in a state of suspended animation, never truly resting, never truly living. My husband had insomnia for years, she said quietly, her hands working on Alexander's tense neck, especially in the last few months. The pain kept him awake, and the fear of what would come next, too. She felt Alexander tense slightly, not from physical discomfort, but from curiosity. "What did you do to help?" he asked, and there was something in his voice, a hesitation, as if unsure he had the right to ask. "Little things," Maya said, continuing soft, circular movements along his neck muscles. "Scalp massage right here," she demonstrated, her fingers working gently at the base of his skull. Deep breathing, 4 counts in, 6 counts out. And sometimes just being present, not trying to fix everything, just being there. Alexander stayed quiet for a long moment, but Maya could feel something shifting in the tension of his body. It was as if he was mentally recording every word, every technique, like precious information he might try to use later when he was alone again. "My back pain gets worse at night," he admitted suddenly. "During the day, I manage. Meetings, decisions, problems to solve. But at night, when everything stops..." His voice trailed off, as if he didn't know how to finish the sentence. "The pain gets louder when there's nothing else competing for your attention," Maya said understandingly. "It's like during the day you can drown it out, but in the silence it comes back full force." "Exactly," Alexander whispered, genuine surprise in his voice. "That's exactly it. How do you experience?" Maya said simply, but her voice carried years of sleepless nights, of medications losing their effect, of giving everything she had to care for someone who suffered. Pain isn't just physical. It touches everything. How we sleep, how we think, how we relate to the world. Her hands found a particularly sensitive spot between his neck and shoulder, and when she applied gentle pressure, Alexander let out a sound that was half sigh, half moan of relief. "This has been hurting for months," he murmured. "I thought it was just age or work stress. Never considered it could be something more." Maya worked carefully in that area, feeling years of tension start to melt away beneath her hands. "Sometimes we carry emotional pain in the physical body," she said softly. "Grief, anger, disappointment. Everything finds a place to hide in muscles and joints." She felt Alexander grow very still under her hands, as if she had touched on something he wasn't ready to look at too closely. But there was no resistance in his posture, only a deep stillness, contemplative. "I run an empire," he said suddenly, his voice oddly distant. "I make decisions that affect thousands of people. I move millions of dollars with a signature. And I can't make my own back stop hurting." There was something almost childlike about that admission, a genuine bewilderment at his own humanity. Maya kept working, letting the silence hold space for whatever he needed to process. "Executives come into my office and leave shaking," Alexander went on, his words flowing smoothly, sounding as surprising to him as to Maya. "Grown men who run their own companies. And I'm here, finding out that a massage therapist from Humboldt Park understands my pain better than any of the expensive doctors I pay." Maya felt a flush of warmth in her cheeks. It wasn't just the compliment. It was how he said, "massage therapist from Humboldt Park." No condescension, no class judgment. Just recognition that real expertise doesn't always come from expected places or credentials. "Pain is pain," she said softly. "No matter how much money you have or how many people work for you, the body feels the same thing." "Yes," Alexander murmured, something almost wondering in his voice. "Yes, that's true, isn't it?" Maya kept working, her hands now moving with more confidence over the familiar territory of his tension. Alexander had relaxed significantly, not completely, but enough for her to work more deeply, reaching layers of stress that probably hadn't been touched in years. As she worked, Maya began to notice other subtle changes. Alexander's breathing had become more natural, less controlled. The muscles that had been like armor were finally starting to give, allowing the healing touch to reach places that had been locked away. Then Alexander said something that completely changed the atmosphere in the room. "It's been a long time since someone touched me without wanting something in return," he murmured. So quietly Maya almost didn't hear. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that clearly surprised even Alexander himself. Maya felt her hands pause involuntarily, not because she was uncomfortable, but because she suddenly understood something profound about this man. He wasn't just physically isolated. He was emotionally starved. Every touch in his life had come with a price tag, an agenda, and expectation. Business handshakes that sealed deals. Professional treatments paid for by the hour. Even intimate touches that were part of transactions. Relationships that existed because of what he could provide rather than who he was. Maya resumed her work, but her touches became even gentler, more intentional. She wasn't just working on his muscles anymore. She was offering something he had forgotten existed. Touch that was about giving, not taking. About healing, not using. "Everyone deserves that," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Everyone deserves to be touched with kindness, without an agenda." Alexander didn't respond with words, but Maya felt his answer in every fiber of his being. For the first time since she'd entered that mansion, since she'd met the man who commanded empires, Alexander Blackstone stopped trying to control everything around him and simply allowed himself to receive something offered freely, with no strings attached. And in that moment of surrender, Maya realized she wasn't just healing his pain. She was teaching him how to remember his own humanity. Maya stepped away from the table for a moment, walking over to the small table where she kept her essential oils. The silence in the room was different now. Not tense and defensive, but contemplative, as if the very air had become more breathable. She mixed a few drops of chamomile oil with almond oil, the gentle scent filling the space. "The lavender was helping," Alexander said suddenly, his voice still muffled by the towel but carrying a different quality. Less guarded, more present. I could actually feel my shoulders dropping. I didn't realize I was holding them so high. Maya smiled as she warmed the oil between her palms. "It's amazing how the body adapts to stress. We think we're relaxed, but we're really just running on a permanent state of tension." "Permanent state," Alexander repeated, and there was something hollow in how he said the words. "Yeah, that describes it well." Maya returned to the table, her hands finding their place again on his shoulders. But this time, instead of immediately starting the massage, she paused, sensing that something had shifted in the atmosphere. "I started carrying tension when I was 8 years old," Alexander said suddenly, the words coming out abruptly, as if they had escaped before he could stop them. Maya kept her hands still, creating a safe space with her presence without pressing him to continue. Years of caring for her husband during his illness had taught her that healing happens in its own time, and pushing only causes more wounds. "8," she said softly, not as a question but as an acknowledgement that she had heard. "That's when they sent me away," Alexander continued, his voice taking on a distant quality, as if he were narrating someone else's story. "Boarding school. The finest money could buy, according to my parents. Character building, they called it." Maya started working again, but her movements were even gentler, instinctively understanding that this man was about to trust her with something precious and painful. "My parents?" He paused, and Maya could feel him searching for words that could adequately describe something that clearly still held power over him decades later. "They weren't really parents. They were like business partners who happened to produce an heir. Mom had her charity galas and social obligations. Dad had his empire to build, and I was just a responsibility to be delegated." The words hung in the air, carrying years of childhood loneliness that no amount of success or wealth had managed to erase. Maya continued her work, her hands offering comfort that words couldn't provide. "The school was worse than home," Alexander continued, and Maya could hear him swallowing hard. "The headmaster believed weakness had to be beaten out of boys. Literally beaten. Not just physical punishment, psychological warfare. They would find your vulnerabilities and use them against you until you learned to bury them so deep even you couldn't find them." Maya felt her heart clench. She had seen similar damage before, veterans who came to her spa, survivors of various traumas who carried their pain in every muscle, every defensive posture. But hearing it from this man, who commanded such power and respect in the outside world, was particularly heartbreaking. "What kind of vulnerabilities?" she asked softly, not from morbid curiosity but from genuine therapeutic instinct. Sometimes naming the pain is the first step toward healing it. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could feel him debating internally whether to continue. When he spoke again, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear. "I used to cry," he said, "at night in my dormitory bed. I missed having someone say goodnight to me, missed having anyone care if I was scared or hurt or lonely. And an older boy, Marcus, he caught me crying one night." Maya's hands paused involuntarily, already sensing where this story was going. "He told everyone," Alexander continued, his voice now completely flat, emotionless. "Turned it into a joke. Called me Crybaby Blackstone for months. Made other boys join in. And then the headmaster found out, and he—" Alexander's voice caught, and for a moment Maya thought he wouldn't be able to continue. "He said crying was a sign of weakness that would destroy me later in life, that he was going to help me by making sure I never cried again. He made me stand in front of the whole school assembly and recite all the reasons why I was weak. And then—" Alexander's breathing became shallow, controlled. "Then he beat me in front of everyone as an example of what happened to weak boys." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. This was not the moment for her own emotions. This was Alexander's moment to finally give voice to the trauma that had shaped every aspect of his life. "How old were you?" she whispered. 9, he said. "And after that day, I never cried again. Never showed fear, never asked for help, never admitted weakness. Because I learned the moment you show vulnerability, people will destroy you with it." The silence stretched between them, heavy with decades of buried pain. Maya continued her work, her hands now carrying a different intention. Not just to heal physical tension, but to offer the kind of unconditional, gentle touch this man had been denied when he needed it most. "That's why you built your empire the way you did," she said softly, understanding dawning. "Not just to be successful, but to never be vulnerable again." "Exactly," Alexander whispered. "I learned that there are only two kinds of people in this world, predators and prey. And I decided I would never, ever be prey again. So I became—" he paused. "I became something else entirely." Maya worked in silence for several minutes, processing this revelation. She could see now why Alexander commanded such fear and respect. He had transformed his childhood trauma into corporate armor, using his pain as fuel to build an empire that would make sure no one could ever hurt him again. "But that kind of armor," she said carefully, "protects you from being hurt, but it also keeps out everything else, including the things that might heal you." Alexander went very still under her hands. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, it does." Maya felt compelled to share something from her own experience, a small offering of vulnerability to match his enormous gift of trust. "When my husband was dying," she said softly, "I thought I had to be strong all the time. Thought that if I broke down, even for a minute, I would fall apart completely and never be able to take care of him. So I built my own kind of armor." Alexander turned his head slightly, listening. "But after he passed," Maya continued, "I realized that all that strength I thought I was showing was actually just another form of isolation. I was so busy being strong that I never allowed myself to grieve properly, never let other people help me. And that isolation was just another kind of prison." How did you get out of it?" Alexander asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Emma," Maya said simply. "My daughter needed me to be present, not just strong. She needed me to be human, to show her that it's okay to feel pain, that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's just being alive." Alexander processed this, and Maya could feel something shifting in the tension patterns of his body. Muscle memory was being rewritten by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, vulnerability could be something other than a weapon others used against you. "I've never told anyone about the boarding school," he said suddenly, his voice filled with a kind of wonder. Not therapists, not anyone. There have been books written about me, investigative journalists trying to understand how I built my company. And none of them ever discovered that part of my history. Maya continued her work, creating a safe space with her consistent, caring touch. But here I am, Alexander muttered, more to himself than to her, telling a woman I met 2 hours ago about the worst experiences of my childhood. Why? Why am I telling her this? The question hung in the air, and Maya sensed that it wasn't really meant for her. It was Alexander's own bewilderment at finding himself capable of this kind of openness after decades of lockdown isolation. She didn't try to answer his question. Instead, she simply continued her work, her hands offering the kind of acceptance and understanding that allowed people to discover their own answers in their own time. Because Maya intuitively understood that sometimes the most profound healing happens not when we're trying to fix someone, but when we simply witness their pain without judgment and offer our presence without agenda. And in this moment, this powerful man who had conquered empires was finally learning that maybe, just maybe, he was safe enough to remember who he had been before the world taught him that gentleness was weakness and trust was dangerous. Maya resumed her work with even more delicate movements, her hands finding areas of tension that seemed to have built up over decades. The warmed oil created a comforting sensation that Alexander clearly hadn't felt in a long time, and she could feel his body beginning to truly surrender to the experience. "This house has 43 rooms," Alexander said suddenly, his voice carrying a hollow quality that echoed through the silence. 43 rooms, and I basically live in just 3 of them. The office, the bedroom, and, well, now this room. Maya continued working at the base of his neck, where years of carrying himself rigidly had created knots that seemed almost permanent. "A big house can feel very empty," she observed softly. "Empty," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I bought this mansion to show I'd made it, that I'd conquered the world. But really, it's just a beautiful tomb." His words carried a sadness so deep Maya felt her own chest tighten with empathy. She had known loneliness. Those long months after David's death when Emma was at school and the house seemed to echo with silence. But Alexander's isolation was different. It was self-imposed, built brick by brick over decades of defensive choices. "It wasn't always empty," Alexander continued, a wistfulness creeping into his voice. "Sarah used to visit. My sister. She would bring flowers for the kitchen table, make coffee that actually smelled like home instead of just fuel." He paused, and Maya could feel tension creeping back into his shoulders. That was before everything went to hell. Maya worked more carefully around the areas where tension was returning, her touch gentle but insistent, coaxing his muscles back toward relaxation. "What happened to Sarah?" she asked carefully. Alexander was quiet for a long time, and Maya began to think he wouldn't answer. Finally, his voice came again, heavy with regret. "Our father died 15 years ago," he said. "Left behind a complicated estate, businesses that needed dividing. Sarah, she wanted to keep the family vineyard. It was where we spent summers before boarding school, where Mom actually seemed happy sometimes. She had all these plans, organic wines, sustainable farming, turning it into something beautiful." Maya continued her work, sensing the pain building in his words. "But it wasn't financially smart," Alexander continued, his voice taking on the clipped, businesslike tone she was beginning to recognize as his defense mechanism. "The vineyard was losing money, had been for years. The smart thing was to sell it, use the proceeds to strengthen the other investments." "But she didn't want to sell," Maya said softly, already understanding. "No, she begged me not to, said it was about more than money, that some things were worth preserving even if they didn't make a profit. And Alexander's voice caught. "I forced the sale anyway, used my majority share of voting rights, told her she was being sentimental and naive." Maya felt his whole body tense with the memory, years of guilt creating new knots even as she worked to release others. "She told me I'd turned into everything Dad was, cold, calculating, unable to see value in anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. And then she said," he paused, breathing deeply. "She said she was done trying to find the brother she once loved, because that person was gone. Have you spoken to her since? Maya asked gently. I tried calling a few times over the years, Alexander admitted. But she never answered, and eventually I stopped trying. Convinced myself she was right. That I was better off without people who couldn't understand the decisions I had to make. Maya worked in silence for several minutes, allowing his words to settle. She could feel the grief he carried for this lost relationship, sensing that losing Sarah had been more devastating than any business loss he had ever experienced. And then there was Rebecca, Alexander said suddenly, his voice so quiet Maya had to strain to hear. My ex-wife, beautiful, intelligent, came from a good family. We met at a charity gala, married within a year. Had Emma 2 years later. At the mention of Emma, Maya felt something shift in her chest. She hadn't expected this connection, that the powerful man on her massage table was the father of someone. Emma, Maya repeated softly. How old is she now? 12? Alexander said, and for the first time since Maya had met him, she heard pure tenderness in his voice. She has Rebecca's eyes, but my stubborn streak. Smart as hell, creative, funny. His voice trailed off, and when he spoke again, the pain was evident. I haven't seen her in 6 months. Maya's hands stilled for a moment. 6 months. Rebecca left when Emma was 7, Alexander continued, his breathing becoming less controlled. Said she called me emotionally unavailable. Said living with me was like being married to a machine that looked like her husband but had no heart. She took Emma to Seattle, started a new life. Maya resumed her work, but her touch carried even more gentleness, understanding now that this man's isolation wasn't just about lost business relationships. He had lost his family. I get scheduled phone calls with Emma twice a week, Alexander continued, and Maya could hear him struggling to maintain composure. 15 minutes each time, supervised by Rebecca. Emma tells me about school, her friends, the books she's reading. And I don't know how to be a father over the phone. Don't know how to tell a 12-year-old that I love her when I can barely remember how to feel love anymore. Maya felt tears threaten her own eyes. As a mother, she couldn't imagine being separated from Emma for 6 months. Couldn't imagine having to schedule time to speak to her own daughter. Rebecca was right, Alexander whispered, his voice breaking slightly. I had turned into something cold. Emma would try to hug me when she was little, and I'd pat her shoulder and tell her to go play. I thought I was teaching her independence, strength. But I was just passing on the same emptiness that had been passed to me. Maya's touch became even gentler, working now not just on physical tension but trying to offer some kind of comfort for grief that ran deeper than muscle and bone. Love isn't weakness, she said softly, echoing his earlier words about strength. My daughter Emma taught me that. After David died, I was so afraid of being vulnerable, of letting her see my pain. Thought I had to be this unbreakable mother. But she needed to see that I was human, that it was okay to hurt, to grieve, to need comfort. Alexander listened intently, his body completely still under her hands. One night, Maya continued, she found me crying in the kitchen, and instead of running away or getting scared, she just climbed onto my lap and held me, told me it was okay to be sad, that she would help me feel better. This little girl, showing me that love means being present with each other's pain, not running from it. She sounds incredible, Alexander whispered. She is, Maya said simply, and your Emma probably is too. Children are amazingly resilient, amazingly forgiving. They don't need perfect parents, they just need present ones. Alexander was quiet for a long time, and Maya could feel some fundamental shift happening in his body. Years of held tension were finally beginning to release, not just in his muscles but in something deeper. His breathing pattern changed, becoming less controlled, more natural. The rigid line of his shoulders finally softened. I became the monster I most feared, he whispered suddenly, his voice raw with realization. I spent my whole life terrified of being powerless, of being vulnerable, of being hurt the way I was hurt as a child. And in trying to protect myself, I became exactly like the people who hurt me. Maya felt him tremble beneath her hands. Not from cold, but from the force of emotions that were finally being allowed to surface after decades of suppression. She continued her work, her touch steady and reassuring as he processed this painful recognition. I isolated my daughter the same way I was isolated, he continued, his voice thick. I withheld affection the same way it was withheld from me. I taught her displays of emotion were inconvenient, that vulnerability was something to be ashamed of. Jesus. What have I done? Maya could feel moisture on the massage table. Tears that Alexander was finally allowing himself to shed after decades of stone-like control. His whole body was shaking now, years of suppressed grief finally finding its way to the surface. I destroyed my relationship with Sarah because I couldn't admit some things were worth more than profit, he whispered. I lost my wife because I couldn't show her my heart. And I'm losing my daughter because she's growing up thinking her father doesn't know how to love her. The sobs that came then were silent at first, just the shaking of his shoulders as decades of pain finally found release. Maya didn't stop working. Her hands continued their steady, comforting rhythm, offering the kind of unconditional support that allowed him to finally break down safely. I've spent so much energy building walls. Alexander, Cesuru entre lágrimas. KUSKC como construir pontes. Y agora neo se esse atar demais para aprender. As maus de Maya para sus hombros, descansando ali com uma firmeza jaunty enquanto esse homem poderoso finalmente esse permite ser completamente, absolutamente humano. Neste momento, cercado por toda sua riqueza e sucesso, Alexander Blackstone era simplesmente uma pessoa dor, finalmente corajoso o sufficient para enfrentar o custo da armadura que havia construído para se proteger. E na suave luz de sala de massagem, enquanto suas lágrimas caem livremente pela primeira vez décadas. Maya entende que às vezes a cura mais profunda química com a coragem de reconhecer o monstro que nos tornamos. E esperança de que nunca é tarde demais para lembrar a pessoa que dia fomos sob todas as camadas protetoras. The silence that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced before. It was no longer the tense silence of a man struggling against his own defenses. It was the fragile silence of someone standing at the edge of an abyss, knowing the next step would change everything forever. Alexander's breathing became irregular, each breath sounding like a struggle against the weight of decades of suppressed emotion. Maya could feel small tremors running through his body, as if some massive internal structure was finally starting to crack under its own weight. When Emma was 6, he whispered, his voice so fragile Maya had to lean closer to hear. She drew me a picture. It was our family. Rebecca was smiling, Emma was smiling, and his voice broke. I was just a stick figure with no face, no expression, no humanity. Maya's hands paused on his shoulders as he continued, each word coming out more strained than the last. She brought it to my office so proud, wanting to show me what she had created. And I looked at it for maybe 5 seconds before telling her I was busy, that she should go show mommy instead. His whole body began to shake. She stood there for a moment, holding her little drawing, and then she said, Daddy, why don't you look happy in my pictures? The sob that escaped him then was raw, primal. The sound of a man finally confronting the devastating truth about himself. Maya immediately stopped what she was doing, stepping back to give him space as the floodgates finally opened. I told her, Alexander continued through his tears, I told her that happiness wasn't important, that success was more valuable than feelings. My 6-year-old daughter, and I told her that feelings were a waste of time. His shoulders began to convulse with the force of his crying. Not the controlled, dignified tears of an adult, but the desperate, abandoned sobs of the child he had been forced to bury so many years ago. Decades of suppressed grief poured out of him like water rushing through a broken dam. Maya quickly moved to her small cabinet, retrieving a box of soft tissues. She returned to his side, placing them within reach while maintaining a respectful distance. Her presence was steady, grounding without being intrusive. I remember, Alexander gasped between sobs. I remember kissing her goodnight when she was little, before I learned to be afraid of showing affection. She would wrap her tiny arms around my neck and whisper, I love you, Daddy, right into my ear. And I would feel. His voice cracked completely. I would feel like my heart might explode from how much I loved her. Maya settled into the chair beside the massage table, moving carefully and quietly. She had witnessed many breakdowns over the years. Clients releasing trauma, grief, pain they had carried for decades. But this felt different. This was watching a man's entire identity crumble and rebuild in real time. But then, Alexander continued, his words barely audible through his tears. I started pulling away. I started convincing myself that too much affection would make her weak, would set her up for the kind of pain I had experienced. So I stopped the goodnight kisses, stopped the hugs, stopped telling her I loved her because I thought, Jesus Christ, I thought I was protecting her. His crying intensified, and Maya reached out instinctively, her hand finding his shoulder. The moment her palm made contact, Alexander's sobs became even more desperate, as if her gentle touch had unlocked some final reservoir of grief. The night she left, he whispered. Rebecca was packing their suitcases. Emma came to my office. She was 7, wearing her little pink pajamas with those ridiculous unicorn slippers. And she asked me if I was going to miss her. Maya felt her own tears starting, but she blinked them back. This was Alexander's moment of reckoning, and he needed her to be steady. And he could barely speak through his weeping. I told her that missing people was unproductive, that she should focus on her new adventure in Seattle instead of looking backward. I gave her a handshake. A damn handshake, Maya. My 7-year-old daughter was asking if her father would miss her, and I gave her a business handshake and told her to be strong. The sound he made then wasn't quite human. It was the wail of a parent finally understanding the magnitude of their failure, the keening of someone who had discovered they had thrown away the most precious thing in their life through their own deliberate choices. She looked at me, Alexander sobbed, with those big brown eyes, and I could see her trying so hard not to cry, trying to be strong like I had taught her. And when Rebecca called her to the car, Emma whispered, "Okay, Daddy," and walked away, and I let her go. I watched my baby girl walk out of my life, and I didn't run after her. Didn't scoop her up and tell her I was sorry, that I loved her more than breathing. Maya's hand remained on his shoulder as he collapsed completely into his grief. Years of suppressed humanity came pouring out, not just about Emma, but about every relationship he had sacrificed on the altar of his own protection. And David Richardson, he gasped between sobs. My best friend from college. He had a small tech startup, something innovative with renewable energy. Came to me for funding when his company was struggling. And Alexander's voice thickened with self-loathing. I listened to his presentation, saw exactly how valuable his patents were. And instead of helping him, I orchestrated a hostile takeover. Destroyed his company, took his patents, left him with nothing. Maya felt him trembling under her touch as he continued confessing decades of decisions that had built his empire at the expense of his soul. He called me afterward, Alexander whispered, said he couldn't understand how the person who had been his best man, who had known his children since birth, could destroy him so completely. And I told him it was just business, that friendship was separate from professional decisions. But it wasn't just business, Maya. I saw weakness and I exploited it, even when that weakness belonged to someone I claimed to love. The tears came faster now, decades of buried shame finally finding their way to the surface. Maya remained silent. Understanding this was not the time for words. This was the time to witness, to hold space while a human being finally confronted the monster he had become. I became exactly like them, Alexander whispered through his tears. Exactly like the parents who abandoned me, like the headmaster who broke me, like everyone who taught me that love was dangerous and vulnerability was currency to be stolen. I spent my whole life terrified of being hurt, so I made sure I was always the one doing the hurting first. His crying had evolved now into something deeper. Not just grief, but true remorse. The kind of soul-deep recognition that comes when we finally see ourselves clearly after years of self-deception. Sarah tried to save me, he continued, his voice raw. For years, she kept reaching out, kept trying to find the brother she remembered. and every time I pushed her away more definitively, until finally I succeeded. I made myself so unlovable that even my own sister gave up on me. Maya noticed that her own hand was trembling slightly as she continued to offer what comfort she could through simple human contact. She had never witnessed such complete emotional devastation. Not just sadness, but the total dismantling of a person's entire sense of self. I ruined everything pure in my life, Alexander sobbed. I turned love into transaction, turned family into a business deal, turned friendship into opportunity for exploitation. And for what? For this empty mansion? For a corporate empire that will crumble the moment I'm gone? For respect based on fear rather than affection? He turned his head slightly, and for the first time since his breakdown began, his eyes met Maya's. Through his tears, she could see something she had never seen in him before. Complete, unguarded humanity. No masks, no defenses, just raw, honest pain and recognition. I don't even know who I am when I'm not being cruel, he whispered, his voice like a child's. I've been wearing this armor for so long that I don't know if there's anything left underneath it. What if there's nothing good left to save, Maya? What if I've destroyed everything decent about myself? Maya's response was wordless. She simply moved her hand from his shoulder to brush away a tear from his cheek. A gesture so gentle and accepting it triggered fresh sobs. In all his adult life, no one had ever touched him during a moment of complete vulnerability. No one had ever witnessed his tears without trying to fix him or comfort him with empty platitudes. Thank you, he whispered through his tears, looking at her with something approaching wonder. Thank you for letting me be human again, for not telling me everything will be okay, for not trying to make me stop crying. Thank you for just staying here while I fall apart. Maya smiled softly, her own eyes glistening. Everyone deserves to be seen, she said simply. Everyone deserves to be witnessed in their pain without judgment. Alexander closed his eyes, allowing fresh tears to fall as he finally, for the first time in decades, felt truly, completely accepted. Not despite his brokenness, but including it. Not for what he could provide or accomplish, but simply for being human and in pain and brave enough to finally admit it. In this moment, surrounded by all the trappings of his success, Alexander Blackstone was finally, authentically himself, and discovered that being seen in his complete vulnerability was not the destruction he had feared, but the beginning of something he had forgotten was possible: hope for genuine connection. The silence that followed Alexander's sobs was different from before. It was no longer filled with tension or pain, but with a strange peace, like the air after a devastating storm. Maya stayed by his side, offering her quiet presence as he gradually caught his breath, wiping away the last of the tears that had released decades of suppressed emotion. Alexander slowly sat up on the massage table, as if testing whether his body still belonged to him after such a complete emotional release. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the tissues Maya had handed him, and she noticed his movements felt different now, less rigid, more human. He began, then cleared his throat, his voice still hoarse from crying. I need a moment, please. Maya nodded in understanding, stepping back to give him privacy as he gathered himself. She watched as he stood carefully, his usual commanding posture replaced by something more vulnerable, more genuine. Without another word, he walked toward a door she hadn't noticed before, likely leading to his larger office space. While he was gone, Maya found herself reflecting on what had just happened. In all her years of massage therapy, she had witnessed many emotional releases, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't just grief or trauma. It was the complete dismantling and potential rebuilding of a person's entire identity. The sound of Alexander's footsteps returning caught her attention. When he entered the room, something had changed. He still carried himself with authority, but there was a softness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A humanity unlocked by his tears in his hand. He held a piece of paper, clearly a check, based on its distinctive size and format. As he approached, Maya saw his hands were still slightly unsteady, as if the emotional earthquake he just endured was still sending aftershocks through him. Maya, he said, his voice carrying a formality that seemed at odds with the intimacy they'd just shared. "Before you leave, I need to give you something." He extended the check towards her, and when she looked down at it, her breath caught in her throat. The numbers seemed to dance before her eyes, not making sense at first because they were so far beyond anything she'd ever encountered. $1 million. Written in Alexander's precise handwriting, both in numbers and in words, as if to make absolutely sure there was no mistake about his intentions. "Mr. Blackstone?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. I can't accept this." Her hands trembled as she tried to push the check back toward him, but Alexander stepped back, refusing to take it. "This isn't payment for the massage," he said firmly, his professional tone returning but now softened with warmth. "This is for... God, how do I explain this? This is for what you gave me back. My humanity. My ability to feel something other than anger and calculation." Maya stared at the check, her mind racing. $1 million would change Emma's entire future. College, opportunities, the security she'd never dreamed of providing. But accepting such a huge sum felt wrong, as if she were profiting from Alexander's moment of complete vulnerability. "I was just doing my job," she said softly. "I was just being present. That's not worth—" "It's worth everything," Alexander interrupted, his voice filled with a conviction that surprised them both. "Do you have any idea how many therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists I've seen over the years? People with degrees and credentials and expensive offices, and none of them, ever managed to create a space safe enough for me to fall apart." He stepped closer, not in his usual intimidating way, but with something approaching tenderness. "You didn't try to fix me," he continued. "You didn't offer platitudes or false reassurance. You just stayed. You witnessed my breakdown without judgment, without trying to stop it or make it better. You let me be human without demanding anything in return." Maya looked down at the check again, the amount still feeling surreal. She thought of Emma, their small apartment, the scholarships she hoped her daughter could earn for college, the dreams she'd never dared voice because they seemed so far out of reach. "But I need to ask something of you," Alexander continued, and now there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her look up. "What you saw today, my breakdown, my tears, my confessions about my family, this has to stay between us. The world isn't ready to see Alexander Blackstone as a human being with flaws and regrets." He paused, running a hand through his hair. A purely human gesture, free of his usual calculated composure. "My entire empire is built on an image of invulnerability," he explained. "If word got out that I spent an afternoon crying over my daughter, about mistakes I've made, it would destroy everything I've worked to build. Shareholders, competitors, employees, they all need to believe I'm made of stone." Maya understood immediately. In a world where power is currency, showing vulnerability could indeed be devastating. She'd seen glimpses of this even in her small business. Clients who needed her healing services but could never let their communities know they required help. "Your secret is safe with me," she said softly, finally closing her hand around the check. "I would never betray your trust." Relief washed over Alexander's face, but then Maya surprised him by stepping closer, her voice gentle but firm, the same way she had spoken during his breakdown. "But I need you to know something, Mr. Blackstone," she said, meeting his eyes directly. "What I witnessed today wasn't weakness. It wasn't something to be ashamed of or hide away." She saw him tense slightly, as if bracing for another defensive wall, but she continued before he could retreat. "What I saw was courage. Pure, honest courage. It takes an incredibly brave person to finally stop running from their pain, to face the damage they've done, to acknowledge the cost of their choices. Most people never find that strength. They spend their entire lives hiding from themselves." Alexander listened carefully, as if memorizing her words. "The person I saw crying today wasn't weak," Maya went on. "That was the real you, the person who loves his daughter so much losing her breaks his heart, the person who still grieves for the brother he was before life hardened him, the person who recognizes when he's wrong and feels genuine remorse." Tears threatened to return to Alexander's eyes as he absorbed her words. "That person, the one beneath all that armor, that's who you really are," Maya said gently. And someday, when you're ready, I hope you'll let Emma meet him. Because she doesn't need a perfect father. She needs an authentic one. Maya turned to begin packing her supplies, moving carefully and deliberately as she processed the magnitude of what had just happened. The massage oils went back into their carrying case. The portable table began to fold up. Alexander watched her work, seeming reluctant for this extraordinary encounter to end. When she finished packing and stood with her supplies ready, he cleared his throat. "Maya," he said, and there was something almost shy in his voice now. "Thank you for saving me from myself." She smiled, her expression carrying all the warmth she'd shown throughout his breakdown. "You saved yourself, Mr. Blackstone," she replied. "I just held space while you found the courage to do it." As Maya prepared to leave, the check carefully folded inside her purse. She carried with her not just financial security beyond her wildest dreams, but something equally precious. The knowledge that even the most armored hearts can remember how to break open, and that sometimes the greatest gifts we offer each other are simply presence, acceptance, and the courage to witness each other's humanity. And Alexander, watching her go, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope that maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild what he had torn down, starting with the most important relationship in his life, the one with his daughter. The first feeling Alexander experienced upon waking was one of strangeness. Not the abrupt, anxious awakening that had defined his mornings for decades, but a gradual, natural awakening, like his body had finally remembered how to truly rest. The golden morning light filtered through the silk curtains of his bedroom, and for a moment, he lay still, processing the unusual sensation of having slept deeply. For the first time in years, he hadn't taken Ambien or any of the other medications he kept on his nightstand. Last night, after Maya left, he had simply slept, like a child worn out after a day of liberating tears. Alexander sat on the edge of his king-size bed, ran his hands over his face, and noticed his muscles were relaxed in a way he couldn't remember since. Since when? Maybe since before his adoptive parents died, before Boston Academy, before learning that vulnerability was a synonym for defeat. The bathroom mirror reflected back a man he barely recognized. It was still him. The same piercing blue eyes, the same lines etched by decades of tension. But there was something different, a softness around the eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. As if yesterday's tears had washed away not only the pain but also a stiffness he hadn't even realized he was carrying. As he dressed, automatically choosing one of his impeccable Armani suits, Alexander felt a clarity of mind that was both invigorating and unsettling. It was as if a fog he hadn't known existed had lifted, leaving his vision crystal clear and his priorities suddenly obvious. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of his Mercedes, he instructed Harold, his driver, to slow down. "There's no rush today, Harold. Actually, there should never be." Harold looked in the rearview mirror, surprised. In 15 years working for Alexander Blackstone, he had never heard those words. As soon as he arrived at the office, Alexander went straight to Margaret's desk, his executive assistant. She was, as always, impeccably prepared with his agenda for the day. A daunting list of meetings, calls, and decisions that usually energized Alexander with their promise of conquest and dominance. "Margaret," he said, his voice carrying a different kind of authority, less threatening, more determined. "I need you to cancel 3 specific appointments today." She grabbed her pen, ready to take notes, but her expression showed surprise. Alexander Blackstone never canceled meetings, especially not entire mornings full of them. "The 10 a.m. meeting with the Chun Technology Acquisitions team," he continued. "The 11:30 with the lawyers about the lawsuit against Mitchell Industries. And most importantly, Margaret, cancel the entire Henderson manufacturing operation." Margaret's pen froze mid-word. The hostile takeover of Henderson Manufacturing had been planned for months, representing millions in profit and the consolidation of another market segment under Blackstone Enterprises' control. "Sir," she said cautiously, "the Henderson operation is scheduled to start next week. The lawyers have already filed the petitions. The bankers are lined up. Cancel everything," Alexander repeated, his voice firm but not cruel. "Henderson Manufacturing employs 800 families in a small town where they're practically the only employer. I'm not going to be responsible for destroying an entire community for a few $1 million I don't even need." The silence in the office was palpable. Margaret had worked for Alexander long enough to know he didn't change his mind on big financial decisions. But she was also savvy enough not to question him directly. "I understand, Mr. Blackstone. Any replacements for those appointments?" Alexander hesitated for a moment, then said something that surprised them both. "Actually, Margaret, I need a personal favor. I need you to find contact information for Sarah Blackstone Morrison. She was Sarah Blackstone before she got married." Margaret's professionalism kept her expression neutral, but Alexander knew she was curious. In all the years working for him, she had never heard a mention of close family. "Any additional information that could help with the search?" she asked. "She lives in Portland, Oregon. She's a pediatrician, married to a man named David Morrison. They have 2 children." His voice wavered slightly. "She's my sister." On the other side of town, Maya sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, the check for $1 million laid out in front of her like it was a document from another planet. Emma had left early for school, kissing her on the forehead as she always did, unaware that their lives had completely changed overnight. Maya had spent hours awake, not out of anxiety, but processing the magnitude of what had happened with Alexander. The money was transformative, of course. She could pay off all her debts, secure Emma's education, maybe even realize the secret dream she'd held for years of opening her own holistic wellness center. But mostly, she found herself praying. She wasn't an extremely religious person, but there was something about yesterday that felt almost sacred. The moment when a completely armored human being finally allowed their true nature to emerge. "Please," she whispered to the universe, "let him find his way. Let the man I saw yesterday be able to reconnect with his daughter." While Maya carefully planned how to use this unexpected gift, Alexander sat in his executive office holding a piece of paper with the information Margaret had obtained with impressive efficiency. Dr. Sarah Blackstone Morrison, 4821 Oak Grove Avenue, Portland, Oregon. Phone: 503-555-7829. Pediatric Associates of Portland. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at his sister's phone number. 15 years. 15 years since he had deliberately cut all ties with the only family he had left, since he had chosen his emotional armor over the unconditional love she had always offered. Alexander grabbed the phone several times, dialed half the number, then hung up. How do you start a conversation like that? How do you apologize for a decade and a half of deliberate cruelty? Finally, taking a deep breath and recalling Maya's words about courage, he dialed the full number. Pediatric Associates of Portland, this is Sarah Morrison speaking. Her voice, more mature, professional, but unmistakably Sarah. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Sarah," he said, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. It's Alex." Silence on the other end stretched so long that Alexander wondered if she had hung up. Then, he heard a deep, trembling breath. "Alexander!" Her voice carried decades of wounds, but also a cautious hope that broke his heart. "Is that really you?" "Yes," he said, closing his eyes tightly. "Sarah, I need to ask your forgiveness. For everything. For all these years. For becoming someone you don't recognize." He could hear her crying silently on the other end. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "Not literally, but the brother I knew who used to read me stories when I had nightmares, who protected me from the mean boys at school. I thought he was gone forever." "He almost was," Alexander admitted. "But yesterday, someone helped me remember him. Sarah, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I caused too much pain, I was too cruel for too long. But if there's any chance you'll let me try to make things right." "Oh, Alex," Sarah said through her tears. "I prayed for that every day for 15 years. Of course there's a chance. You're my brother. You always were my brother, even when you were hiding from me." The relief Alexander felt was so intense he had to lean on the desk. Would you want to meet me?" he asked hesitantly. "I know it's a big ask, but I could fly to Portland, or if you prefer." "I would love that," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger and joyful. "The boys, my kids, Alex, they have an uncle they've never met. David always asked about you. Always hoped that one day. You have a family? Alexander murmured, reality sinking in. You built a beautiful life, and I lost all of that by choice. You didn't lose it, Sarah said firmly. There's still time. There's always time for family, Alex. Always. When Alexander hung up 20 minutes later, he was crying again. But this time, they were tears of gratitude and possibility. For the first time in decades, he wasn't looking back with regret, but forward with hope. And in Portland, Sarah Morrison ran to the bathroom in her office, looked at herself in the mirror, and whispered a prayer of thanks. Her brother was back. After 15 years of mourning someone who was still alive, Alexander had finally come home. 6 months later, fall was beginning to paint Portland, Oregon, with golden hues that seemed to reflect the transformation in Alexander Blackstone's life. He sat in the backyard of Sarah's house, watching his nephews, 10-year-old Michael and 8-year-old Joshua, play on the swing David had built on the big oak tree. "Uncle Alex," Michael yelled, waving excitedly. "Look how high I can go." Alexander's heart warmed in a way he had never experienced. During their first meetings, the boys had been shy, even intimidated by his imposing presence. But children have an extraordinary ability to forgive and accept, especially when they sense genuine love. Sarah came outside carrying 2 cups of hot coffee, the same cinnamon and vanilla blend she used to make when they were teenagers. She sat beside him on the garden bench, and for a moment, they simply watched the boys play. "You've changed," Sarah said softly, "not for the first time in these 6 months. It's like you've rediscovered who you were before all that pain." Alexander nodded, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought him there. "Someone showed me that I don't have to wear armor to be strong," he said. "In fact, true strength comes from taking that armor off." On his bedside table at the hotel where he stayed during his weekly visits to Portland, there was a growing stack of letters. Not business letters or contracts, but handwritten personal letters addressed to Emma. Each letter was a piece of his soul on paper. Memories of her childhood, apologies for lost years, descriptions of how he was trying to become the man she deserved as a father. Emma had yet to respond, but Sarah encouraged him to keep writing, insisting that time would eventually heal that wound too. "She will forgive you," Sarah had said weeks ago. "Emma has a generous heart, just like her mother did. She just needs to see that your changes are real, not just words." Across the country, Maya was putting the finishing touches on her wellness center, Healing Hands. The space, located in a renovated old warehouse in downtown Chicago, was everything she had dreamed of and more. Serene massage rooms with gentle water fountains, a studio for yoga and meditation classes, a cozy reception area filled with plants and calming art. But what made her proudest was the program she had implemented. For every paying client, she offered a free treatment to someone in need: veterans with PTSD, overwhelmed single mothers, lonely seniors, people who, like Alexander once had, carried pain the world couldn't see. Emma, now 17 and growing into an impressive young woman, often helped after classes, organizing towels and learning basic massage techniques. "Mom," she had said a few weeks ago, "it's amazing how people change when they feel like someone really cares about them." Maya smiled, thinking of a certain CEO who had learned that same lesson in a very personal way. Alexander had changed more than just his relationship with family. Blackstone Enterprises had become something entirely different under his new leadership. Instead of hostile takeovers and predatory tactics, the company now offered startup capital and mentorship to emerging entrepreneurs. The Second Chances program provided funding and guidance to people who, like he once had, just needed an opportunity to prove their worth. That particular morning in October, Maya was finalizing preparations for the official opening of Healing Hands. Local reporters were scheduled to arrive, and she had prepared a speech about the importance of holistic care in the community. What she didn't expect was to see a familiar limousine pull up to the center. Alexander stepped out of the vehicle, but he wasn't the same intimidating man who'd entered her life 6 months before. He wore a simple suit, no showiness, and his eyes held a warmth she immediately recognized. It was the same vulnerability she had witnessed that transformative afternoon. "Maya," he said as he approached, his voice carrying all the gratitude 6 months of reflection had deepened. "I hope you don't mind the surprise." She hugged him without hesitation, noticing he didn't stiffen at the touch as he used to. Instead, he returned the hug sincerely. "I wanted to be here for your opening," he continued, "and I wanted to make a donation to your free treatment program." He handed her an envelope, and when Maya opened it, tears welled in her eyes. Another sizable check, not $1 million this time, but enough to ensure her charity program could operate for years. "Alexander," she whispered, "you don't have to." "I have to," he said firmly. "You gave me my life back, Maya. The only way to honor that is by helping others find theirs." When the cameras arrived and the reporters began their interviews, Alexander surprised Maya by asking to speak. He had never spoken publicly about personal transformation. His public image had always been built on impenetrable strength and relentless success. "My name is Alexander Blackstone," he began, his voice clear and strong in front of the cameras. "And 6 months ago, I was a completely lost man." Maya held her breath, moved by the courage he was showing. "I had built an empire," Alexander continued, "but I had lost my humanity in the process. I thought strength meant never showing vulnerability, never admitting weakness, never letting anyone see through the mask I wore." He paused for a moment, his eyes finding Maya's. "Maya Rodriguez didn't just offer me a massage treatment. She gave me something no one had dared give me in decades, the permission to be truly human. She taught me that real strength doesn't come from hiding our pain, but from facing it. It doesn't come from being invincible, but from being authentic." Tears ran down Maya's face as he spoke, recalling that afternoon when she had held space for him to finally break down and rebuild. "A single session changed my whole life," Alexander confessed to the cameras, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had experienced a profound revelation. "She didn't heal me with her hands, but with the truth no one had the courage to see. That beneath all the wealth and power, I was still that scared boy who just needed to be loved." The silence after his words was heavy with emotion. Maya could see reporters discreetly wiping their eyes, touched by the raw honesty of his confessions. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she was deeply moved, looking at Alexander, then at the cameras. She found the words that had been in her heart all these months. "As therapists, as healers, as human beings," she began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Sometimes the greatest healing we can offer isn't technique or medicine. It's simply allowing someone to be truly human." She paused, thinking of that extraordinary afternoon when she witnessed a man's transformation. "We all wear masks," she continued. "We all build walls to protect ourselves. But do you know what makes me happiest? Knowing you found your way back home, to your true self." When Alexander left that afternoon, heading to the airport to fly back to Portland and spend more time with his rediscovered family, he carried with him not only gratitude for the second chance Maya had made possible, but a deep understanding that real transformation doesn't happen just once. It's a daily choice to choose authenticity over armor, vulnerability over invincibility, love over fear. And Maya, closing the doors of healing hands on that first official day, whispered a prayer of thanks for the mystery of human healing and the extraordinary honor of witnessing a shielded heart learn to love again. The real miracle, she knew, wasn't just Alexander's transformation, but the reminder that all of us, no matter how lost we may be, still carry within us the ability to return to our truest humanity.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.